to break the effort to break the blockade was going nowhere. They knew that a letter that had circulated in Congress calling for American support for Israel had gotten a grand total of 80 signatures out of 535 members of Congress. They knew that Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq were in a mutual, quote, defense alliance, whose defensive nature was to destroy and annihilate the state of Israel. They knew that Andrei Gromyko, the Soviet foreign minister, had called in the Israeli ambassador to Moscow and said, if you attack, we will go in on the side of our Arab neighbors. They knew that Charles de Gaulle, the president of France, hitherto Israel's principal arms supplier, had imposed a unilateral arms embargo. One of the main things I love about the French, moral courage. They had unilaterally imposed an arms embargo on Israel. They knew that the State Department said that America's policy in the '67 war was to be neutral in word, it was in word, deed, and thought. They would not take sides. They knew that Lyndon Johnson had sent a telex to Prime Minister Levi Eshkol saying, Israel will not be alone unless it goes it alone. That is to say, do not strike first. So this is what they knew on the 4th of June of 1967. They convened a cabinet meeting to discuss what it was they were going to do. And one member of the cabinet said, what we should do is we should send a ship through the Strait of Tehran on effectively a suicide mission. The Egyptians will bomb it, they will sink it, we'll lose a few sailors, but then we'll have legitimacy. Then we will have casus belli. How about doing that? Another member said, under no circumstances should we go to war without a major power as an ally. By the way, this is exactly what is happening now as Israeli planners think about whether they have any support, certainly from the United States, for any prospective military action. So they needed, another guy said we need a major ally. David Ben-Gurion was flatly opposed to starting war. He said, what's the rush? Let's take our time. And in that meeting, Yigal Allon, who later became foreign minister, I think he was labor minister at the time, he said something that's important. In fact, it's so important, it's maybe the most important thing that was ever said by a Jew in the 20th century. He said, the international community will condemn us if we attack, but we will survive. Yigal Allon did not lose his instinct for danger, and so Israel survived. The one thing, if you take nothing away from this talk, the one thing I want you to take away is to remember that Israel did not come into existence to showcase Jewish victimization. Israel came into existence to end Jewish victimization.
Sit down, and we'll have a Q&A session for a few minutes. We have desserts for you, but before we end, we're going to have a closing comment from Steve Crane, who I'll call up here in a few minutes. But please make your questions short, no statements. Let's start with you, Steve.
It seems the elephant in the room is that everybody agrees that Israel is a miracle, but that we don't, Jewish people don't really describe who is creating this miracle. Most Jews don't know whether the book of Ezekiel was in the New Testament or the Old Testament. They don't know who Yehuda Hanassi was. So don't you think that the real instinct for danger is that we don't know who we are and that we don't ascribe the power to Israel's existence to the guardian of Israel, who neither slumbers nor sleeps?
I should preface my comment by saying that I'm aware that I'm standing between you and dessert. So I'll keep my answers brief, but I'll take as many questions as you have time for. I disagree, and I say this as a very secular joke.
Repeat the question.
Essentially the question is, have Jews forgotten that the miracle of Israel is an act of God? Am I being fair? No, I actually don't think so. I think the miracle of Israel is, we use the word miracle metaphorically, Israel is the act of foresighted men and women coming together to end the horror of 2,000 years of dispossession and persecution by putting together a practical plan of political action that in fact too many generations put their trust in a higher power which did not always return the favor, certainly not between 1933 and 1945. And I guess I hope I'm not offending you, I'm offering you a secular view. But it comes down to this view of mine that Israel should not be thought of as indestructible. Israel should not be thought of as a God-made thing. Okay, Israel is a country of men, and it's one of the interesting ironies of Jewish history that not only were the Jewish people returned to politics after 2,000 years of exile from politics, but they were returned to politics in the most acute circumstances possible. I mean, imagine if the land of Israel had been promised in Iceland, right? And there had been or Greenland, or I don't know, well, of course, there would be a UN convention. If we had been in northern Greenland, there'd be a UN convention about Israeli genocide of polar bears. But imagine if the state of Israel had not had the kind of political problems that it has. Made it very different. But not only was Israel returned to politics after 2,000 years of exile, but it was returned to politics in a way that every Israeli prime minister has to constantly confront a choice of evils. Now, someone was asking me just before I got on stage, have you ever met Bibi and what do you think of him? I said, yes, I've met him many times, but I think of him as complicated. But what I will say about Bibi or any Israeli prime minister of the left or the right is I am constantly aware that every choice he or she is making is a damn hard choice. And that politics is not between doing the obviously right, good, just and beneficent thing and doing the obviously stupid, ogreish thing. I mean, that's what Peter Beinart thinks, when it comes to Israeli politics. Like, well, why doesn't Israel just withdraw from the territories and then everything will be fine, right? And it will acquit itself morally in the eyes of Peter Beinart and maybe Barack Obama, and everything will be wonderful. Right. But that's not the case. But Israel, what we've discovered is that every time Israel withdraws, it sends a signal to Israel's enemies to press their efforts further. That it's a sign not of kindness or goodness on Israel's part, but of weakness. And that's tragic. That's a tragic reality. So, a point that I make, part of an instinct for danger is to understand that politics cannot be played on the level of moral vanity. Right? You hear American politicians, they'll say, I'm for the environment. I've never met a person who is sincerely against the environment. My whole life, I grew up in Mexico City, a very polluted city. I've never met someone who said, I'm completely against the environment. What we need is less oxygen, filthy water, I don't know, more heavy metal in my scrambled eggs. And yet people say, I'm for the environment, because they're speaking about politics as a vanity exercise. And those of you who are in college today, this is a very alluring idea. That you should, what should politics be? Well, you should be on the side of good, right? Well, good according to whom? And how? These are the actual political questions which are interesting. The interesting statesmen are not the statesmen who have avoided evils, but who, in the confrontation, in the moment of a choice of evils, have been able to understand that some evils must be chosen because they are lesser evils in order to avoid greater evils. Harry Truman was a great statesman because he dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Winston Churchill was a great statesman because he was prepared to utterly defeat and destroy Nazi Germany, including by way of aerial bombardment. Those were not easy choices. Those were terrible choices. And those are the choices that Israeli leaders face today. So when I talk about this instinct for danger, understand that that's what politics is about. And don't simply put yourself on the side of whatever is fashionable. And I say again to the young people in the world, in the long run, those of you who are going to succeed are going to think unfashionably, are going to be prepared to be ugly, whether it's politically or whatever, you got to be willing to wear ugly clothes, so to speak. Right now, Israel's the ugly clothes country. So be it. It's the right country.
Okay. Yeah.
So given what you had just said, some people, some critics of the present policy of the president say that, well, he is saying that if we follow through with what he wants to do, in 10 years, we will put off Iran's ability to acquire a bomb. And we will put off a possibility for war. He says 20, it could be 10 years. On the other hand, some people say if we bomb them now, they will still get a bomb. Either way, they're still going to become nuclear capable. So what is the difference? What is, in your opinion, and given that this seems to be a culture that we are not addressing, that seems to respect force, what is it in our best interest, given those who made those hard decisions, whether it's Winston Churchill or Truman in the past, what in your best opinion, all that you have said, would be in our best interest right now?
When Israel bombed the Osirak reactor in 1981, the intelligence community was convinced that Iraq would be able to reconstitute its nuclear program in a matter of 2 or 3 years. In fact, it took them a little longer than 10 years, and in the intervening time, Saddam made the terrible blunder of invading Iraq before he had nuclear weapons. Because of that, because of our victory in Iraq in 1991, we were able to send in the inspectors who, in fact, we know did disarm Saddam. This is irrespective of the bad intelligence we had on the eve of 2000. Thank you so much. On the eve of 2003. Okay. There is a notion afoot that if we were to say bomb Iran, that it would be the best thing that would ever happen to them. I once heard a historian say it would give the Iranian regime the so-called gift of Persian patriotism. That is to say, it would rally Iranians to the regime. In 1982, a despotic regime in Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, which was wildly popular in Argentina at the time. And this lady with a handbag said she wouldn't stand for it, and she sent a naval armada out there, kicked the Argentines, defeated the Argentines in Las Malvinas, as they were called. And the junta in Argentina actually fell within a week. Why? Because losing that visibly in a project into which you have invested so much political capital turns out not to be a very good idea. People have also made the argument, and you hear Obama saying this, President Obama saying this, well, if we bomb them, they'll just reconstitute their program. We'll bomb them again.
That's right.
I mean, if Iran must not be allowed to get nuclear weapons, okay, for the reasons we have stated, nuclear proliferation in the regime, and the world's leading state sponsor of terror in possession of the world's most terrible weapons, then you have to be prepared to stop them again and again. I have never advocated sending in the 3rd Infantry Division to liberate Tehran, but you can send the unmistakable message that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. And one more point to consider here. Okay, one more point to consider. I know dessert is pending. Which is that we now have President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama saying an Iranian nuclear weapon is unacceptable. But what if unacceptable means unacceptable in the way I tell my 5-year-old daughter that her behavior is unacceptable? And she knows perfectly well I don't mean it. Goes on her merry way, right? Well, we will have sent a signal in a huge way that when the United States says something, it means nothing. We will be telling our adversaries everywhere around the world that our threats are completely bogus and hollow and empty. By the way, we told them that 2 years ago with the fake red line in Syria. 6 months later, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. And that brings you into a very scary world, because then the only way in which you can restore American credibility is through the constant and massive application of force. Winston Churchill, we mentioned, once said, better jaw-jaw than war-war. right? But it requires some credible belief that what you say, you mean. And if we have a president who clearly does not mean what he says, we will have a cascade of other Irans around the world, mounting crises that will remind us, some of you in this room, what the world looked like in the 1930s. You don't want to live in that world. One more question. And I guess you, since you're standing.
Okay.
Without apology, I am a paratrooper in the Israeli paratrooper. We've fight.
Can you speak louder?
Sorry,
Come up, come up.
Come up.
I have studied for years the statesmanship of the IDF and the Israeli Defense Forces. What I'd like to know is, when will we stop talking? We may be forced into action, but I am not apologetic for the fact that, one, I am a Jew, two, I am an IDF paratrooper, and I'm also an American paratrooper. When do you think we will be forced into action instead of talking to the people that will talk in one side and ignore and lie through the other? It's a simple equation. When will we say no?
Well, there's the wonderful, since we're on the subject of Churchill, there's that wonderful line that Americans always get around to doing the right thing after they've exhausted all the other alternatives. And I have written a book in the possibly vain hope, and I hope you all buy my book, because after all, what is a speaking opportunity but, one in which to hawk your book. In the vain hope that people will understand that we are now pursuing policies that replicate what we did in the 1920s and 1930s when we imagined that the rest of the world would go away. My grandmother knew Leon Trotsky before his spectacular demise in 1940. Funny little story. I once said, "Grandma, what was Leon Trotsky like?" She said, "I was wondering what he'd be like when I met him." And then I said, "So?" And she said, "Well, the main impression was his beautiful deerskin leather gloves and his impeccable French tailored suit." So that was the leader of the proletariat. But Trotsky famously said, "You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you." And that's an important thing to remember. We are imagining that if we just simply say the tide of war is receding, we can, like King Canute, the Viking king, make the tide recede. That's what the president keeps saying. The tide of war is receding. He says Al-Qaeda is on a path to defeat. He says ISIS is the JV team of terrorism. He says that we've reset relations with Russia. Well, believe the visible evidence around the world and understand where what this kind of wishful thinking, what this wishing away of war, of willful, ambitious, tyrannical regimes and people has done for the security of the United States and the security of the Jewish people. It has not been good. So again, I come back to the basic point. An instinct for danger is what preserves human life. It's what preserves a great nation like the United States. And it's what should and must preserve the Jewish people. It's what Stand With Us is all about. So I congratulate you for being here, and thanks for hearing me out, and please enjoy your tour.
Before we leave the seat,
Folks, I'd just like to take a few words to conclude. First, our appreciation to Brett Stevens, one of the all too few and too far between reporters who uses intelligence, honesty, and accuracy. Thank you, Brett. Now, Brett has spoken of some important things, our instinct for danger, and I can tell you, folks, that is what has inspired and the reason for the existence of SWU, Stand With Us. It's an organization that stands for preventing that instinct of danger being extinguished, and we extend it to schools the world over, to students, making literature, bringing people out to talk about it. Folks, I know you know this, but I have to say this, it takes money.